The West trembles. Burkina Faso builds its largest power plant in history. What if the country you least expected has just announced the largest energy project in its history, while arming its farmers with machines that could turn deserts into breadbaskets? This is not a rumor. It is Burkina Faso under Ibrahim Traoré, and what is unfolding may be the most radical transformation Africa has seen in decades. For years, blackouts and barren fields defined the daily life of millions. But today, a 150-megawatt thermal plant rises on the edge of Ouagadougou, while villages echo with the sound of engines plowing land once thought untouchable. The question is no longer, can Africa feed and power itself? The question is, will the world allow it, or will it fear a continent that dares to stand? Do not blink. Stay with us, because this is the story our elders prayed for and our children deserve. Subscribe now and be part of Africa's voice that refuses to be silenced. In the crowded streets of Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso, people are used to darkness. Blackouts are not exceptions. They are routine. Shops shut early, children study by candlelight, and farmers cannot preserve their harvests because cooling systems are unreliable. For decades, this has been the quiet tragedy of a nation caught in the grip of dependency, reliant on imported electricity, imported food, imported solutions. But suddenly the script is changing. On the southeastern edge of the capital, steel structures rise into the sky. The ground trembles as heavy machinery clears the earth. Here stands the future, a thermal power plant with the capacity of 150 megawatts, the largest energy project ever attempted in Burkina Faso. To outsiders, this might sound like a simple piece of infrastructure, but for Burkina citizens, it is nothing short of a revolution. Why does it matter so much? To understand, we must look at the history. For years, Burkina Faso imported large portions of its electricity from Côte d'Ivoire and Ghana. On paper, it seemed a lifeline. In reality, it was a leash. Whenever regional supply chains faltered, Ouagadougou went dark. Entire neighborhoods sat powerless because of shortages beyond their borders. This was not sovereignty, it was survival at someone else's mercy. The new plant signals a dramatic reversal. At 150 megawatts, it eclipses every domestic station before it. Compare this to the 22-megawatt plant commissioned in the capital a decade ago, or the 55-megawatt Kosodo extension, valuable in their time but now dwarfed by this colossal ambition. The message is clear. Burkina Faso no longer wishes to be a passenger in the regional energy race. It intends to drive, but energy is only half the story. In villages stretching from Bobo Dioulasso to Fata Ngurma, another transformation is underway. Ibrahim Traoré's administration has begun distributing agricultural machinery on a scale the country has never seen. Tractors churn the earth where oxen once struggled. Irrigation pumps now push water through parched soil, turning dust into fertile ground. Farmers who once tilled by hand now command engines that double or triple their yields. For years, the Burkina farmer was the symbol of resilience, working against impossible odds, producing just enough to survive but rarely enough to prosper. Imports from Europe and Asia filled the gap, draining scarce foreign reserves and deepening dependency. The introduction of mechanized farming shifts that balance. It is not just about food security. It is about dignity. At the heart of this push lies a broader philosophy. Sovereignty is not an abstract political term. It is measured in bread and light. Without power, factories remain silent. Without harvests, families go hungry. Traoré's strategy is to strike at both weaknesses simultaneously, lighting up the grid while fueling the soil. It is a gamble, but one that has electrified public imagination. The symbolism is undeniable. While foreign critics warn against thermal plants and urge patience for renewable projects, Burkina Faso refuses to wait. The Zagtouli solar farm already demonstrates its commitment to green energy, but leaders argue that the people cannot wait decades for perfect conditions. They need electricity now. They need food now. And so, they build with what they have, not with what donors promise. This boldness resonates deeply in a continent long accustomed to hesitation. Across Africa, governments have delayed, studied, and negotiated while their people remained in the dark. Burkina Faso is writing a different story. By putting steel in the ground and engines in the fields, it is declaring sovereignty is not given, it is taken. And yet behind every promise lies a risk. Thermal power depends on fuel imports, which could expose the country to global oil politics once again. Agricultural machinery requires maintenance, spare parts, and training. Can Burkina Faso sustain this momentum, or will it stumble under the very weight of its ambitions? The stakes are enormous. If successful, this dual revolution, power and agriculture, will not only transform Burkina Faso, but send a message across the Sahel. Dependency is not destiny. But if it falters, critics will say it was reckless bravado, another African dream deferred. The question hangs heavy in the air. Can a nation long dismissed as peripheral truly change its fate with machines, megawatts, and sheer determination? And so we arrive at a turning point. A people daring to rise. But what happens when vision collides with the harsh reality of politics and international pressure? The announcement of the 150-megawatt thermal plant and the wave of mechanized farming spread through Burkina Faso like wildfire. In the markets of Ouagadougou, traders spoke of it with a mixture of disbelief and pride. In rural villages, elders nodded gravely, saying they had waited their entire lives for such a moment. It was as though a curtain had been lifted, revealing a new stage on which the nation could finally perform. At the center of this unfolding drama stands Ibrahim Traoré. Barely in his mid-30s, he is the youngest leader in the region, yet he carries himself with the gravity of a statesman who understands the weight of history. When he declared, "We will feed ourselves and we will light our own homes," it was not just a promise, it was a defiance. In a Sahel battered by insurgencies, poverty, and external interference, his words landed like thunder. The reactions came quickly. For ordinary citizens, there was euphoria. Farmers who had long struggled with hand tools celebrated the arrival of tractors as if they were weapons in a new war, not against an enemy army, but against hunger itself. Young men and women, so often forced to migrate for lack of work, saw in this initiative the possibility of dignified employment at home. Teachers spoke of children finally being able to study under steady light instead of candles. Doctors in rural clinics imagined surgeries no longer interrupted by power cuts. The mood was one of cautious jubilation, not blind faith, but genuine hope. A grandmother in Bobo Dioulasso put it simply, "For the first time, I believe my grandchildren may not live as I did." But the domestic applause was mirrored by unease abroad. Regional analysts pointed out that dependence on imported fuel for the thermal plant could expose Burkina Faso to the volatility of global markets. Western commentators questioned the choice of thermal power at all, urging instead for a total leap into renewables. Yet, to Burkinabe ears, these critiques sounded hollow. The people had heard enough lectures. What they wanted now was action. Inside the corridors of power in Ouagadougou, the atmosphere was intense. Traoré's advisors knew this was more than an economic project. It was a test of legitimacy. In the Sahel, electricity equals authority. A leader may wear the uniform and deliver speeches, but if the lights go out in hospitals, if the harvest fails in the fields, then trust evaporates. Conversely, if the lights stay on and the granaries fill, legitimacy becomes unshakable. The symbolism extended beyond national borders. In Bamako, Niamey, and Dakar, newspapers carried headlines about the Burkinabe gamble. Some called it reckless, others hailed it as visionary. In Accra, commentators noted the irony. Once a net importer, Burkina Faso was positioning itself to reduce dependence on Ghana's grid. In Abidjan, officials quietly admitted they were watching closely, wondering whether a small, landlocked neighbor could indeed outpace them in energy sovereignty. The emotional peak came during a televised ceremony where Traoré stood before rows of newly delivered tractors, their engines gleaming in the sunlight. He spoke not in the language of technocrats, but in the cadence of a farmer. These machines are not gifts. They are tools of our liberation. With them, every field will yield, every hand will be strengthened, and no Burkinabe will bow to hunger again. The crowd erupted. Farmers wept openly, chanting his name. For them, this was no longer about kilowatts or hectares. It was about dignity restored. Yet, as the cheers echoed, doubts lingered. Could a young leader, beset by external pressures and internal challenges, truly sustain this momentum? Would the excitement of the announcement translate into lasting change? The nation stood at the edge of a new chapter, its people caught between jubilation and apprehension. The story had reached its emotional high point, a leader daring to defy dependency, a people daring to hope. The question was no longer whether Burkina Faso could dream, but whether it could endure. And so, as hope surges across the land, another question arises. When the euphoria fades, will the weight of politics and economics crush this fragile new dawn, or will it blaze into something unstoppable? The unveiling of the thermal power plant and the mechanization of agriculture has already begun to ripple through Burkina Faso's social fabric. In the short term, the impact is tangible. In villages once paralyzed by unreliable power, clinics now dream of refrigeration for vaccines, schools anticipate steady lighting for evening classes, and artisans see the chance to run their workshops without the constant drone of petrol generators. Electricity is not an abstract concept here. It is the difference between survival and stagnation. In the fields, the shift is even more immediate. Tractors plowing through once barren soil are not just machines. They are symbols of liberation from drudgery. For the first time, many farmers believe their labor will yield surplus, not merely for family consumption, but for markets that could transform local economies. Women, long burdened by back-breaking manual labor, find relief as mechanization lightens their load and opens new opportunities. Youths, who had seen migration as their only future, are beginning to imagine careers rooted in their homeland. The economic implications are profound. By reducing reliance on imported staples such as rice and wheat, Burkina Faso can conserve foreign currency reserves and reinvest them domestically. Local markets gain strength as demand for Burkinabe produce grows. What begins as a campaign of machines and megawatts becomes, in effect, a strategy for economic sovereignty. The very act of producing food at home becomes an act of resistance against dependency. In the medium term, these changes could reshape national identity. The countryside, long neglected, is being repositioned as the foundation of the state's legitimacy. Farmers are no longer invisible laborers. They are the front line of the country's future. This ties directly into the idea of climate-smart farming West Africa, where modern techniques adapt to harsh Sahelian conditions, combining resilience with productivity. By linking sovereignty to sustainability, Burkina Faso signals to its neighbors that survival in the 21st century is not about aid, but about adaptation. Politically, the strategy is equally transformative. Traore understands that speeches cannot secure legitimacy in the Sahel. Only visible results can. A president who lights the homes of his citizens and fills their granaries earns more credibility than one who bows to foreign dictates. In this way, energy and agriculture become the twin pillars of governance. Success in these sectors translates directly into stability, reducing the appeal of insurgencies and foreign interference. The opposition, weakened in recent years, has struggled to counter this momentum. Their criticisms of the plant's reliance on fuel imports or the cost of agricultural subsidies ring hollow in the face of popular enthusiasm. For ordinary Burkinabe, the sight of their leader handing over tractors or breaking ground at the plant is more persuasive than any policy paper. Still, challenges remain. The state must ensure that machinery is not hoarded by elites but reaches ordinary farmers. It must train operators, provide spare parts, and build the infrastructure to connect surplus harvests to markets. If these steps falter, optimism could sour into frustration. Similarly, the cost of fuel imports for the thermal plant must be managed carefully, or the very dependency the government seeks to escape may resurface in another form. Internationally, these initiatives reposition Burkina Faso as more than a passive recipient of aid. Instead, it is becoming a proactive actor shaping its destiny. This reorientation strengthens the government's bargaining power, allowing it to negotiate from a position of relative confidence rather than desperation. Perhaps most importantly, the social contract itself is being rewritten. For decades, people endured hardship with little expectation that the state would deliver. Today, that expectation is rising. Citizens are beginning to hold their government accountable not only for security, but for prosperity. If Traore sustains this trajectory, he may secure a legacy as the leader who restored dignity to his people. But if he fails, the disappointment could be just as powerful as the hope. The atmosphere across the country is therefore one of fragile optimism. In the streets of Ouagadougou, you can hear both excitement and skepticism. A taxi driver may praise the president for giving farmers tractors, while in the same breath asking whether fuel prices will rise again. A teacher may celebrate the promise of electricity for evening classes, yet wonder whether rural schools will be forgotten in the rush to modernize the capital. It is this tension between hope and doubt that defines the current moment. The seeds of sovereignty have been planted, but will they grow into lasting strength or wither under the pressures of cost, politics, and international resistance? If you believe that Africa deserves leaders who put bread and light before excuses, let your voice be heard in the comments below. But remember, every harvest faces storms, and Burkina Faso's bold new crop of sovereignty is no exception. Beyond Burkina Faso's borders, the announcement of the 150-megawatt plant and the surge in mechanized farming has drawn global attention. In West Africa, the move is seen as both bold and unsettling. Neighboring countries such as Côte d'Ivoire and Ghana, longtime suppliers of electricity to Ouagadougou, now face the prospect of a customer becoming a competitor. Some in Abidjan and Accra quietly fear losing leverage, while others publicly applaud the spirit of self-reliance. ECOWAS, the regional bloc, has issued cautious statements. Officially, it frames the project as part of West Africa's integration agenda. Unofficially, diplomats admit there is unease. A Burkina Faso that no longer depends on cross-border grids or food imports could also become a Burkina Faso less susceptible to political pressure from its neighbors. Sovereignty in energy and agriculture translates directly into independence in diplomacy. Further afield, the African Union has hailed the initiative as a model of resilience in the Sahel. In Addis Ababa, officials argue that the Burkinabe strategy embodies the continent's Agenda 2063, the Africa we want. For them, the significance lies not only in megawatts and machines, but in the defiance of dependency. Europe's reaction has been more ambivalent. Brussels, already pressing African nations to accelerate their green transitions, has questioned the decision to invest in thermal power. Environmental NGOs argue that the future must be solar, wind, and hydro. Yet Burkinabe leaders respond bluntly, "Our people cannot study in darkness while we wait for perfect conditions." By coupling thermal expansion with solar projects such as Zagtuli, they argue they are pursuing a pragmatic hybrid model. Russia and China, meanwhile, see opportunity. Moscow presents itself as a partner willing to provide fuel and technical expertise without political lectures. Beijing, already entrenched in African infrastructure, signals readiness to support agricultural mechanization and grid expansion. For Burkina Faso, these relationships offer leverage, the ability to balance Western conditions against Eastern pragmatism. And what of the United States? Washington views the developments through a strategic lens. In recent years, the Sahel has become a theater of great power competition, with American influence challenged by Moscow and Beijing. A Burkina Faso increasingly self-reliant in energy and food poses both a challenge and an opportunity. On one hand, U.S. officials worry that reduced dependency on Western donors could push Ouagadougou closer to rival powers. On the other hand, American companies see potential markets for agricultural technology and renewable investment if the climate proves favorable. In policy circles, one phrase circulates repeatedly: legitimacy through electricity. U.S. analysts understand that in the Sahel, power supply is political power. A government that can keep the lights on and the fields green can resist external pressure more effectively than one reliant on aid packages. For Washington, this reality complicates its leverage, and so the world watches. Supportive words are spoken, criticisms are voiced, but beneath it all lies a deeper recognition. Burkina Faso is testing a new model of African independence. If it succeeds, it will inspire neighbors. If it fails, it will confirm the skeptics. Either way, the experiment is underway. But here lies the question. As global powers circle, will Burkina Faso hold its course, or be forced back into the old script of dependency? Burkina Faso now stands at a crossroads. On one path lies the promise of transformation, illuminated cities, fertile fields, and a population sustained by its own labor. On the other lies the risk of overextension, financial strain, and renewed dependency. Which path will prevail depends not only on the resolve of its leaders, but on the resilience of its people. The first challenge is sustainability. Thermal plants bring immediate relief, but they depend on imported fuel. If global oil prices spike, the burden could strain national finances. To mitigate this, the government must balance short-term stability with long-term investment in renewables. Already, the Zagtuli Solar Farm and other regional initiatives show a willingness to diversify. The task is not to abandon pragmatism, but to marry it with foresight. In agriculture, the opportunity is immense. Mechanization has already increased yields, but machines alone cannot guarantee prosperity. Training, maintenance, and equitable distribution remain vital. The Ibrahim Traoré rural development initiatives highlight this approach, not merely handing over tractors, but embedding them in a wider framework of farmer cooperatives, storage facilities, and rural credit systems. When the countryside thrives, the nation stabilizes. For Africa as a whole, Burkina Faso's experiment is more than national policy. It is a mirror. Across the continent, countries struggle with the same dilemma: wait for ideal financing or act with imperfect tools. Too often, progress has been delayed by endless feasibility studies, donor conditions, or fear of failure. Burkina Faso has chosen to act. That act of defiance, building even in scarcity, offers a lesson. Sovereignty is not handed down. It is seized, step by step, megawatt by megawatt, hectare by hectare. But no harvest comes without storms. The road ahead will test not only Burkina Faso's economy, but its political will. Foreign pressure may intensify. Domestic expectations may outpace delivery. Regional tensions could flare as the balance of power shifts. Success will require discipline, transparency, and the ability to inspire collective sacrifice. And yet there is reason for hope. The symbolism of machines plowing dry land and turbines humming at the edge of Ouagadougou is not merely technical, it is spiritual. It tells the farmer in Mali, the student in Niger, the trader in Senegal, that Africa need not wait forever for outsiders to approve its destiny. It can build with its own hands even under the harshest conditions. As the sun sets over the Sahel, the question is not whether the dream is possible. The question is whether Africa will water the seeds already planted or let them wither under the weight of doubt and dependency. And so the seed has been sown. But will this generation nurture it into a harvest of sovereignty, or watch it fade into yet another promise unfulfilled? From candlelit homes to humming turbines, from hand-hoed fields to tractors plowing wide furrows, Burkina Faso's story is shifting. What began as a desperate struggle for survival is transforming into a bold declaration of sovereignty. The power plant at Ouagadougou is not just a structure of steel and smoke. It is a promise that no Burkinabe child will study in darkness again. The tractors and irrigation pumps are not mere machines. They are pledges that no family will bow to hunger in silence. This is the essence of independence, not speeches in parliaments, but bread on the table and light in the home. And it is here that the world must pay attention. In a continent often spoken of as dependent, Burkina Faso has acted. In a region accustomed to waiting, it has built. The lesson echoes across borders. Africa does not need permission to rise. The model taking shape is not theoretical. It is practical, rooted in climate-smart farming West Africa, where adaptation meets innovation, and in energy sovereignty, where necessity fuels invention. This path is imperfect, risky, and costly, but it is real. It is alive, and it is shaping a generation that refuses to wait for donor timelines while their futures slip away. At the center of this transformation stand the Ibrahim Traoré rural development initiatives, designed to lift not only farmers, but entire communities. By investing in the countryside, Traoré reminds the world that true strength comes from the ground up, from the hands of those who till the soil and feed the nation. Yet the question remains, will the momentum endure? Will Burkina Faso water the seeds it has planted, nurturing them into a harvest of sovereignty, or will storms, political, economic, or foreign, threaten the fragile growth? That is the test ahead. But for now, hope burns bright. The vision of climate-smart farming West Africa, tied to the hum of turbines, signals a future where the Sahel is not defined by scarcity, but by courage. And if Burkina Faso can dare, then Africa can too. If this story stirs something in your chest, do not let it pass in silence. Like, share, and subscribe, because our history was muted too long. Let us say our future out loud. Drop your voice in the comments. New Africa, Africa rise. It's time for Africa.